So today on the bench we have a Cobra 200 GTL DX. They're okay radios, not one of my favorites. It's a black box export radio, but it was actually made by Cobra. Probably my first complaint about these radios. They do the same thing that pretty much all other export radio manufacturers do when they make a high power radio. Where do they mount the amplifier section, or not so much the amplifier section, but where do they mount the heatsink? The bottom of the radio. Where does the heat go? Up, right into the radio. It kind of defeats the purpose. But, yeah, other than that, I mean, they've got their advantages and disadvantages. The frequency counter is definitely a nice touch on these things. They are multi-mode, so they're not just AM sideband. They have FM and, as well as CW positions. Now this one was sent in, and the customer said that the internal adjustments were very touchy. Really wasn't sure what he was talking about until I went to do some internal adjustments. And oh my God, touchy doesn't even begin to describe it. So let's crack the cover off of this guy. So on these radios, unlike most radios of this type, when the radio's right side up, you can actually see the components. There's really nothing on the bottom side other than the heatsink and a few solder connections for non-surface mount components. But most everything other than with the exception of maybe electrolytic capacitors and some other stuff, everything else is surface mount in one of these. And surface mount components was one of the big problems in this one. So actually, right over here are actually a bunch of parts that I changed. They don't take up much room because they're tiny little critters. But all of these are actually trimmer potentiometers. Usually they're not red. So apparently, I'm not sure if the customer did that or someone else that's worked on this before. Maybe in an attempt to keep these things from moving. But holy smokes, were they ever loose. And when he said touchy, he wasn't kidding. Like when you try to adjust the power or modulation, or you try to adjust anything which any of these trimmers controlled, you'd be all out and you'd turn it and then it was gone, and it would come back and then it was gone. And if you look at them, it'd probably never show up in the camera. A few of these things, and that one just went to the floor, so it's gone forever. Trying to find one here. Some of them just look like they're bowed up. I don't know if someone would use a screwdriver that was just way too big. I really don't know. I can't. I'm not even going to try to take a guess. There's also a couple surface mount resistors in here. There's one right there. Now stuck to my tweezers. Get off. That little guy, an even smaller 0603 package one, so that's a 1206. There's an 0603 right there, that little guy. And the camera's out of focus. Focus, focus, focus. So yeah, that little speck right there, that's another one. And now that's... And a piece of wire, which was replaced with a resistor, like it's supposed to have. So actually the wire, they had the wire bodged in right there, where you see that surface mount resistor right there. It's not supposed to be a piece of wire, it's supposed to be a 1000 ohm resistor. When you do the channel modification on these, what you're supposed to do is, there's originally would have been a resistor right here, a 1000 ohm resistor in fact. You're supposed to take that resistor off and move it to the two empty pads that are located right there. Well, somebody didn't do that. They apparently removed this one, and they just bodged that piece of wire across there. So I took the piece of wire out and actually put a proper 1000 ohm resistor in. Where in the hell is it? I think it was this one right here. This resistor was replaced. I don't know what... Well, I can't say I don't know what they were doing. Actually, I get the feeling because this is your low and your high power adjustments for AM and FM. And that resistor there is part of that circuit. I get the feeling because the potentiometers were just trashed, for a lack of better terms. I've just never seen so many trimmers in a radio bad like this. But I get the feeling they stuck that resistor in there. They changed the value of it, trying to bump the power up because they just couldn't get it with this potentiometer because it was just so bad. So all of those trimmers were replaced. So actually it was that one, that one, that one, that one. Let's see. That one, and I think that one. I got what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think there was 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7 of them. And pretty much all of those are power, modulation, adjustments, sideband balance. So the normal things that an owner might screwdriver, yeah, the things that an owner usually wouldn't screwdriver, all of those trimmers were fine. So all the rest of the trimmers in here, like the squelch that's down over here, the bias adjustments, you know, there's one right there for the driver, one for the final, adjustments for FM deviation, there's adjustment for your meter adjustment. Yeah, just none of the other ones were, they're all fine. But these little guys over here, yeah, man, they're so loose, it's not even funny. I mean, I swear you can blow on them and they just spin like a fan blade. They're so blasted loose. But, yeah, so there's the inside, in case you've never seen the inside of one of these. I think this is a BE version, the looks of it. Crap, I can't half see it. Yes, this is the BE. So they went through several revisions on these radios because they were known for having lots of little problems. And they came out with updated boards over the years. So this is the E version, you know, through its life. And there was also, I think they also had an F. But, yeah, it had lots of revisions over the years, doing little minor modifications. Now, personally, one of the biggest problems from my point of view with these radios, it's not something that they did, it's something they didn't do. There's no way to, I don't know if I want to say calibrate the frequency counter or center the clarifier or either one. So normally, when you do a transceiver alignment, okay, you'll set your radio, whatever the service manual tells you. As my camera mount swings around here. Okay, little guy, let's try and get that straightened out. You'll set it to whatever channel they want it on. You'll center your clarifier, okay? So now this one has a coarse and a fine control, so you would center both of those. Then you'd connect your frequency counter to a test point in the radio, and you would make adjustments to bring your frequencies so they're perfectly dead nuts on. You don't do these radios like that. There is absolutely no adjustment for the frequency counter in these. So if you center the clarifier, and then you make your adjustment to, actually it's this transformer right here, so you center your clarifier, your display is going to be off. Which in a normal radio would be fine, because you would, after you do the entire PLL synthesizer alignment, usually the last step in a radio with a frequency counter is, there's usually a trimmer capacitor for the frequency counter so you can calibrate it. Not in these radios. So if you center your clarifier, attach to TP2, which is on the, you have to get to from the underside of the board because it's actually inside this shielded can, which is edge soldered the whole way around the can. But there are 2 access points for TP1 and TP2 on the underside of the board. So, but if you check your frequency and you adjust it using this coil, all is great and joyful with the world. Your radio will be dead nuts on frequency, your clarifier is perfectly centered. The only problem is, odds are your frequency counter is not going to be correct anymore. Yeah. So, that was actually one of those service bulletins they actually came out with for these radios, because the alignment procedure originally for this radio didn't even mention the frequency counter. Not one bit, because there is no adjustment. So, their updated procedure for doing these is you put the radio on whatever it, actually they don't care, they just tell you to put it on a channel, pick a frequency, center the clarifier, and then attach a frequency counter basically for your transmit frequency, and what you do is adjust that tunable transformer until your transmit frequency corresponds to what is actually shown on the frequency counter here. So yeah, it's kind of a bass-ackwards way of doing, actually you don't center the clarifier, actually that's what you're supposed to do is so if you're on, let's say, CB channel 38, you would set this for 27.385. And then you would make your adjustment. You'd have to put it on AM, so you have a carrier, or CW or FM. But you'd attach a frequency counter or a sample port to the output of the radio, and you would adjust this until you got 27.385 at the output. Yeah, that's just an ass-backwards way of doing it, because your clarifier is not centered now. So actually, if I did center about there to look centered. Now it's not off by much, but it is off by 0.0002. So it's off by 200 hertz. But it's off. And that's kind of the whole thing. People that have a counter, they want it to be accurate. Now it actually is accurate. That is the transmit frequency. But your clarifier is not centered. So then if you turn your clarifier, so now the clarifier, luckily this one was actually very close. To look at it, it's actually kind of hard to tell unless you're in person, but it is turned a little bit sideways now. But now it's dead on frequency. But yeah, that was just a bird brain idea. I don't know who the genius was that set up the frequency counter for this thing, because yeah, that's weird. Adjust your transmit frequency to match the frequency count, the radio's frequency counter. Yeah. So, other than that, they're not really that horrible over radio. Now they're surface mount. So, I had to change all those little trimmer resistors, which in a normal radio, I'd reach over, grab the desoldering iron and just, suck out 3 solder joints and the trimmer would fall out. Yeah, they're a little bit more challenging to do in these radios because they are surface mount and they are, as you can see, I set one on my finger. You can see how teeny tiny these little guys are. And I just dropped him in the radio. So, these radios are not for people that don't like working on surface mount stuff. Now, bright side was, this thing hadn't been butchered. So there hasn't, modulation limiters, all your ALC, AMC circuits, nothing had been tinkered with in this thing. I did do one modification to this. Other than replacing these parts, like I say, that one resistor back here had been changed to a different value. I'm assuming to try and make up for the trimmer that was bad, and put the resistor in place of where the jumper was there. The only other thing I did was change this electrolytic capacitor here to a different value. These things are known for having the AMC circuits in these. They work, but yeah, I guess when they calculated it on paper, it may have looked fine on paper, but the timing for the AMC circuit in practical use of the radios, yeah, it just doesn't work that great. So AMC is what controls the modulation. The AMC circuit is what controls the modulation when you're in AM mode. The AMC circuit prevents you from overmodulating. And if you adjust, you always hear people say, yeah, one day just crank it up to the max or people disable it. Honestly, people, and I've shown that time and again on a spectrum analyzer, you do something like that, it's doing you no good, and very possibly actually reducing your output power. Now, you'll look at it on a power meter, it'll look fantastic, but it's a watt meter. It's not telling you what frequency that new power is on. Now, the modification I did has really nothing to do with that. It's a timing change. So that's what this electrolytic capacitor right here does. That's actually part of the AMC's timing circuit. So it's how fast it reacts. And if you change it too far in one direction or the other, actually, if you go in one direction too far, yeah, you'll just end up with overmodulation. But if you go in the opposite direction too far, if your value of that capacitor gets too low, you'll actually start to sound really choppy because the AMC circuit's going to be reacting too fast. Now, the original problem, in my opinion, with the AMC circuits in these is they react too slow. So they'll clamp off, and then because they have a fairly large electrolytic capacitor here, larger the capacitor, larger the charge, the longer it takes it to discharge, so the longer that it holds, basically it's holding the AMC circuit, for conversation purposes, I guess we could just say clamped. So that large value capacitor, by lowering its value some, you allow the AMC circuit to react faster. So when a peak hits and it's gone, the AMC circuit can go back, can basically unclamp, allowing your signal to go through without being attenuated too much. Because that's what happens. It stays turned on too long is basically what it does. So I did change that. Other than that, no other modifications. Actually had a bit of a heck of a time trying to adjust the RF chain in this thing. Yeah, this was, and some of the, I've run into that in a few radios, not just the 150, 200 GTLs, but a few other radios before. Some radios just seem to get finicky. You try and adjust this thing in sideband, it sounded harsh. Try to adjust the bias a little bit different, and that's another thing. The bias in these, which way is right? The factory service manual tells you, so actually what they have in here, what they call a driver, just slightly out of camera view, what they call a driver, there's actually a 2078 right here, which is actually a common final in a lot of radios, AM radios, like a Cobra 29. So they're using that as a driver. It drives a, hell, I don't even remember what the hell the number is on that thing. What is it? A RD16, something like HHF1, I think. Yeah, 16HHF1. So the 2078 drives that, and then that is what they call a final, and it drives the PA amplifiers, or the actual amplifier stage in this thing. So the driver is set for a bias current of 60 milliamps, and this is set for 1.3 amps. Well, a lot of people will tell you, but it's a MOSFET. You don't adjust MOSFET bias using current, you adjust them to the gate voltage. Well, if you try and adjust this to somewhere between, let's say, 3.2 to 3.5 volt gate voltage on this thing, well, then your bias current drops down to, shoot, less than 50 milliamps. And it's supposed to be 1.3 amps, according to Cobra. So, yeah, it's kind of a... this one is actually adjusted by the book. That's actually what I ended up doing. I got the driver and the bias are set to the factory standards. I just had to tweak a little bit the RF final adjustment on this. All of these adjustments were done for peak in AM mode, and then I adjusted this one for peak AM modulation, and it actually came back and adjusted, I think it was this one, for peak sideband transmission power, and it balanced out fairly well. And it got rid of that harsh kind of, it was in low power, because this radio has two power levels, low and high. In low power, it had always been fine, but in high power, yeah, it had a kind of a crunchy, almost crackly sound to it. And I initially thought it was a bias problem. Apparently it wasn't, but yeah, like I say, some radios can be a little finicky, and this one was one of them. So yeah, just a quick overview of the radios. That's it. There's not a lot. It's basically just a surface mount radio like pretty much any other. The only big difference being it has a built-in amplifier state, a high power amplifier stage in it. So there you go. There's a Cobra 200 GTLDX ready to be put back together. Need to clean it up a little bit, knobs and the chrome and whatnot, but put back together for the customer, and it can be headed back to them for use.